Welcome to another episode of The Aligned Life, The Goddess Life, where we dive into living life fully aligned, mind, body, and spirit, peaceful and unbothered. I'm your host, Hallie, and I'm here with my co host, Ashley, for another installment of Trauma Talk Thursdays. Welcome, Ashley.
Hello, it's so good to be here.
I love sharing this space with you, and I think that this week we have a lot of juicy bits that the majority of the population can probably relate to because we're going to start with talking about being enough in yourself and removing shame from your life. Uh, have you had to overcome any feelings of not feeling enough in yourself?
Oh my goodness, yes. So, a good chunk of my life has been driven to prove that I'm enough. And that was through learning addiction, if you will, right? I would constantly be learning something new and getting certifications, taking courses, taking classes, all to prove that I was enough and that I knew enough and that what I had to say was valid.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's really difficult when we go through different things, and it's really hard to go through things when you need to feel that outside validation. It's difficult to enter into new scenarios, new relationships. It's difficult also to move on from things that may not be in your best interest. And you find yourself in this stagnant place sometimes because you're just so, I hate using the word desperate, but in reality, that is what it is. Like you're feeling this desperation to have approval and validation.
Absolutely. So one of the things I did this exercise with my one of my clients, and it really kind of opened her eyes to how that shows up for her and the differences between it, because enoughness is basically a sub part of worth, right? Your self-worth. And I was like, I want you to imagine you spent all of your time finding just the right supplies and devoting tons of hours to perfecting your skills, and you made this absolutely wonderful product, and then it goes and gets put on the shelf, and instead of calculating out the cost of the materials, the cost of the time that it took you to build this, right? You let whoever walks in that likes it choose the price. I was like, because if you were to give it a price, what would it be? And she says, well, it would be priceless because it's my favorite and it's absolutely perfect, right? Because I've given her all those different prompts. And she's like, it would be priceless. And I'm like, right. But what would you accept from someone if they offered to buy it from you? And I don't remember the exact amount that she had given me, but it was something along the lines of like $10, $20, And I'm like, why is there a difference within that? I was like, how you treat that object is just exactly how you treat yourself.
Exactly. And looking at, especially from a business perspective, because I know lots of our listeners have small businesses, and I know we have kind of both been in this area where we have something to offer. And whenever you have something to offer, you have to go through that initial, well, what am I going to charge for it? And I know we also touched on kind of briefly in Roundtable, I believe, that there's been this influx of conflict within the spiritual communities about charging for services. But at the end of the day, when you look at it and you look at what time you're putting into it, how much of your soul you're putting into it, all of these different things, it's, I like to compare it to the material market also, because when you buy something from a wonderful designer kind of a place, which would be the equivalent of like a small business. They just have a larger price tag and have been around a little longer. You're paying a huge price tag, but you're getting something of such wonderful quality. It's not going to fall apart tomorrow. You're not going to throw it away in a year. And it's something that you want to pass down versus going to Walmart and picking up a $20 shirt that is going to rip after 3 washes and the labels are going to start falling off of it and it's going to be a heavy thing to deal with when you don't put anything into this quality of yourself. You're diminishing who you are and what you're putting out into the world.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other challenges that I see a lot with enoughness and worth is, when you aren't giving it to yourself and you're putting that in other people's hands, you're always going to feel cheated. And because other people don't know what you've been through, what your experiences are, what your strengths and skill sets are, right? So they're always going to undersell, always. It's just human nature. I mean, you might encounter those rare individuals that will overestimate a price or a value, but y- oftentimes you're going to get a lot of people, like if you post something on Facebook Marketplace, you're going to get a lot of people that are trying to lowball you. And if you are seeking that enoughness and that validation from other people that you are enough, that you are worthy, you're going to be accepting all of those lowball offers.
Yes, 100%. You're going to be pulling in all of their objectives, their needs, whether you know it or not, because they're not thinking about you. They're thinking about what is best for themselves and their pocket and their situation. And that is the energy they're bringing to the situation. And I know we're using like money and pockets and value as a huge metaphor here, but when we begin to talk about what people are putting into you, we have to remember that idea of not taking things, big air quotes, not taking things personally, because they're looking at it from their point of view. And your point of view is, I need you to love me, to validate who I am. I need you to approve of the amount of work that I'm putting into something. And they're like, well, this person is doing so much. This is fantastic. Thank you for doing all of this for me. But they're not actually putting anything into you.
Well, from a trauma perspective, too, when we settle, we end up tolerating a lot of abuse and a lot of things that are just really unhealthy for us, too, because we're in that desperation space where we will take anything that we can get. So instead of recognizing the red flags, we have this tendency to justify and rationalize, right? And we'll tell
Yes.
ourselves, oh, well, they didn't mean it like that. Or, oh, that's just how they show that they care. They wouldn't be getting upset or angry with me if they didn't care about me, and things like that. And I see that a lot. And I mean, I'm guilty. I used to do that so much. And I really had to like call myself out on that rationalizing and justifying
Yeah.
and putting words in people's heads, right? Because I'm like, that's that's not true. That's not what's going on. This is not good for me. And at what point am I willing to walk away and recognize that this is just not happy? This is not good. This is all suffering. This is all struggle. And I'm just tolerating it. I'm putting up with it and I'm kicking the can down the road
Yeah.
until it gets to the point where I literally cannot continue.
I think the perspective of trauma that I most associate with is putting out and not getting anything back.
Mm.
And which is why, like, when I look at validation that way, it's because you're just constantly putting out, and the person's like, mine, thank you, puts it in their pocket, and they don't do anything for you. And there's no reciprocation, there's no two-way street. It's not a partnership. It is, well, what can you do for me?
I see that a lot. And I mean, not always. I've seen it a lot within my own relationships, but I've also seen it in work, right?
Yeah.
Because and I talked about it briefly last week, about that recognition and the true meaning of recognition. But when you're seeking that validation in recognition from others, you're not giving it to yourself. So when you do receive it, usually you're dismissing it, right? Because you can't receive it because it has to come from within and has to come from yourself. So then you're just stuck in this never ending cycle of trying to get it. And when you get it, you dismiss it. Like, how many times have we received like this amazing compliment and we immediately downplay it? And we're like, oh, it's nothing. Or, oh, it could have been way better, you know? Or
Oh yeah.
my favorite was I would change the subject. Then I'd be like, I like your purple shoes.
That I resonate heavily with that. Um, but yeah, going back to that idea of putting up with things and seeking that toxic, where I'm going to use the big air quotes here, that toxic validation. Because yeah, or even putting up with something that is toxic, with something that is abusive, because they may do little things for you. Like, oh, I can deal with this because, oh, he's trying in this area or they're trying in this area. And they may like bring me presents and then talk to me like I'm crap. Like that is a whole aspect of it. So when we look at approval addiction, when we look at needing to have that enoughness in ourselves, the idea is that you can find everything from inside of you.
Mhm. Well, I'd like to point out that all of those, well, but those are all our ways of rationalizing and justifying staying in a situation. And if it's truly healthy and good for us, we don't need to justify it. It
Correct.
just is.
Yep. When we to branch off a little bit here, let's look at attachment for a second, because I feel
Mm.
like this screams heavily of that. Because when we look at these different types of relationships, you have this anxious attachment where you are in a constant need of reassurance. You're in a constant need of connection, physical and emotional. And I want to separate a partnership emotional connection between an emotional need to constantly be in contact, because that's a
Yeah.
lot.
And it's very repelling too, right? I mean, think about how many times you've experienced other people coming at you and you can just feel that need and it kind of causes you to pull away. It's very pushy.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
and and that's just one of those ways that we subtly sabotage ourselves because we're seeking that validation and approval from outside of ourselves.
Yes. And to touch a little bit also on that push away. So let's look at one of the aspects of the idea of twin flame here. And I'm going to say one of the aspects because there's many. And I'm specifically talking about the more toxic new idea that we have of it, where it's like, okay, this person needs to totally take on and accept everything I'm putting out, because it is simply a shadow, like a reflection, a
Hmm.
mirror of them that they need to do shadow work for. And that ends up when you have this longing within your anxious attachment to be so connected with something because you don't feel a connection in other places, your partner is not called to that. They're a different human being, no matter how close or connected you may be. And just like you said, the more you are overbearing, the more that person is like, I got to get away from this. And that causes a huge struggle and issue where you're not going to find that enoughness and that validation. You're simply going to find more of that separation because you're searching for it in something else instead of yourself.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the things that I did in relationships before I started really, really diving deep into myself and finding that approval and validation was I would I would be the anxious attached, and then I would switch over to I forget the name of it, but essentially I would start telling myself
Avoidant.
stories. Yeah, avoidant. And I would be like, when I wasn't getting what I needed, I wasn't getting the matched energy. I would tell myself, oh, well, they're just not that into me. And I would throw these huge pity parties, right? And I would tell myself all these awful things. You're not good enough. You aren't pretty enough, or whatever.
You
And I would just
deserve to
start,
be alone.
yeah, I just start tearing myself down and basically talking myself out of that relationship, sabotaging it, even though that had nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with my own internal like need for it, but also fear of being let down.
Oh yes, 100%. And typically when you start showing some quote unquote big air quotes here symptoms of both, they call that disorganized attachment a lot of times
Okay.
because your brain is trying to you're trying to read the situation and see which one fits. And typically that I'm going to use typically here as a big blanket statement because in that idea it's that there has been some disconnect a long time ago about typically in the parent-child relationship where you were supposed to be shown how to accept the way that other people feel about you, and you were supposed to accept how to feel about and empower yourself. And for some reason, you weren't shown that.
That
Not
sounds
saying
about right.
you, just like a
No,
blanket, but if it fits, it fits.
totally fine. I'm the oldest child and have two younger sisters. So, and it was that very hands-off generation. So, yeah, I
Yes.
definitely see a lot of that.
Oh
Um,
yeah, and in that hands-off generation it's so often because you're like, okay, well, I learned how to make friends with people. I learned how to begin relationships, but that was because you were kind of like thrown into it and you were like, here's people, go. Um, and you weren't ever told how to react. That's the wrong statement. The right statement will come to me in a second. But it's like you didn't have this support system to explain things to you. And it can be because of that, or it could be like for me, I had trauma that happened at a very early age, and I had something that caused my brain to not really understand what human bonding was,
mhm.
which is a very interesting thing because I then had to spend like the rest of my life trying to figure out, well, do these people want me to be like buck wild and crazy? Do they want me to be the life of the party? Do they want me to be nice and kind? Do they want me to be playful? I don't know what they want. And which that whole problem there is, I don't know what they want.
Mhm.
Not, I don't know who I am. I knew who I was, but who I was, there's no way that could be what everybody else wanted. There's no way.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other challenges is we're both empathic or highly sensitive, right? And so we're picking up on those emotional cues and feeling those, and then we turn around and start to internalize them. And of course, as a young child, what do? You go into self-blame. It's a causation. I did something wrong. Uh, I must have made them feel that way. So then goes into and reinforces that validation, especially if you're not getting the attention that you're seeking.
Yes, very, very much so. And in that is where we see that disorganized attachment because you're trying to figure out, okay, I need this love. I need this connection because for whatever reason I don't have it within myself or within my stable relationships, which again is typically the parent child. Um, and also at the same time, you're trying to protect yourself. So you're like, I don't need them. I don't need you. I don't need any of these things, which is I also want to state this like that is technically true. You don't need the validation of others for things, but when you're in this hurt stage, you're not putting that validation in yourself. You're isolating.
I call it toxic independence.
Yes, I like that. That's nice. I like that.
I was toxically independent because I'm coming from that space of, I don't trust that other people are going to be there for me or come through for me. So the only person you can count on is yourself. And I know a lot of people can identify with that. And one of the things that I'm always saying to clients is you can do the same thing, but the why behind it is what matters. And that's what you're going to reinforce and continue to attract. If you keep doing something from this space of being wounded or hurt, then that's what's going to keep replaying.
Oh, yes, 100%. You're not going to find your way out. It makes me think of in Finding Nemo, that waterway that they take with the sea turtles, and you just gotta rip it, grip it, and roll. When there's an
Go with the
out, you
flow.
just gotta go, man. And it's hard. It's so hard. And so that's when we start to look at, okay, well, how do I work in a healthy relationship? How do I work in a healthy connection? And going back to that idea of, okay, so in that partnership where you may be a little overbearing and your partner may be like trying to pull away, that doesn't necessarily mean that your partner is not a secure partner. It just means that they're also trying to protect themselves because you're you're being kind of, I liked what Lane said in Tarot Talk, and the word that she uses, you're being very crunchy. You're being very cringe. You're being very, very toxic, and it's not good for the other person's mental health. And one, we kind of have to come to terms with that in ourselves that we are sometimes crunchy, cringy, toxic people. Everyone is. No one is an exception in this. And we have to step back and say, oh, I'm sorry. That is not what I need for my higher self, for my best self, and my highest good. And we have to find that security in ourselves. And I know you and I talked about this last week too. That's what we call stepping back into your power.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things that's helped me is first really looking at what my needs and values are within relationships. And I'll go through Maslow's hierarchy with needs with clients constantly, um, just in stage one of boundary setting, right? But it's like really looking at, what do I need in order to feel safe? What specifically has to be there? And when I'm being toxic, what am I missing? Why
Yes.
am I acting that way? Why am I lashing out? What am I trying? What am I craving? And what am I trying to create?
Yes. And someone in one of our interviews that we'll have up later later next month, the way she looks at it, she says, "What's the lesson? What is it that I'm supposed to learn
I,
here?"
and that's a really good way to look at it. But I think it's coming from a trauma perspective, it's almost a double-edged sword to look at it from that perspective, because then it kind of like reinforces that idea of I'm doing something wrong.
I could see that. I could
Does that
see
make
that
sense?
being part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I would, and me, I love words, and I'm very particular with what words I choose, especially working with a lot of trauma. But I would be like, okay, where can I grow, and what can I do differently that might give me a different experience?
I like that. I like that because, yeah, it does show that you can still learn something without showing that, okay, maybe I made a mistake. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of shame within mistakes and the idea that you didn't get it right the first time. And it's kind of tying back into that perfectionism that we touched on last week, right? And there's
Yes.
this whole idea that I'm wrong because I didn't do it right the first time. But when we acknowledge that our brains literally learn through trial and error, right? Like you cannot learn something without attempting it and then making the adjustments. And I don't remember what book I was reading, but it was around the neuroscience. There we go. It was around the neuroscience, and it was talking about how the expectation of the outcome differs from the actual outcome. And that's the moment that it kind of clicks in our brain and kind of helps us rewire and adjust so that the next time we're able to commit that learning into action. So, giving myself permission to fail was one of the very first steps to kicking that need for validation, need for approval, and recognizing, I'm going to try and I'm not going to get it right. And I'm going to have to just keep adjusting and
Yes.
keep improving.
Yes. And I think that goes into kind of that second idea that we wanted to talk about today is diving into that idea of shame and allowance and permission, because it is so hard for people to see that they are allowed to do those things, or allowed to have, and it kind of also goes into that idea of the healing, because sometimes you can end up feeling like you are not allowed to have a contradicting idea or a contradicting statement. You're not allowed to have that counter argument, when really it is about how you are approaching it and allowing space to be shared with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that allowed to in and itself, right? And you're going to hear me say this probably a million times, but judgment is when we project our own preferences onto somebody else. And shame is when we take those preferences and internalize them and take it personally, right? So I don't meet their preferences, which means I'm bad. And that's really like the root of a lot of the shame that I've dealt with. I've yet to encounter anything different. It's always come down to someone else's preference. So the idea of being allowed to have that contradictory idea, other people might not agree with it, but I think it's really just being okay with that.
Oh, yes. And I find myself doing very similar things, especially because like I I work at home, I go to school, I homeschool my two kids, I have a kid with extra needs. I cannot do the dishes 5 times a day. I can maybe do them like 3 times a day. And one of my big issues has been feeling shame behind if someone has to come in and do them instead of me, or if someone comes in and like asks, well, why aren't the dishes done? I internalize that like you have stabbed me through the heart.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I should have done them. I should have, and you go into all those should statements.
Yep.
Yeah. So uh if it makes you feel any better, I probably do them maybe once a week.
That makes me feel
As
a
a
lot
single
better.
mom, single working mom, and having an ADHD child, I've just kind of like recognized that there are certain battles that just I'm not willing to fight. And
Oh,
I'm only
no,
one
I'm
person
there
and I
with
can only
you.
do so much.
And I will also confess here that I probably do them 3 times a day because of my trauma and shame. Like
Right.
that is still something I am working to this day. And it is mostly in those aspects, but that just kind of goes to show that it is really hard to get it out of how deeply it can become ingrained in you. Because I have done years and years of healing and years of work, and I am at a point where I can finally start utilizing the healing that I've gone through and the education I have behind it. But I still have to remind myself, whoa, Hallie, you have taken this way too far inside of yourself. You need to like go outside and touch grass.
Right. Well, I mean, okay, who here was taught that you have to have the house immaculately clean before anybody comes over? Because for a
Me.
long time, I just would not invite people over because I recognize that I do not have the capacity to make this house look like nobody lives here. And my sister, I keep telling her, I'm like, literally, it is okay. It's not a hoarder house. It's not any kind of like major inconvenience. Your house is lived in, and it's probably cleaner lived in than mine is. Like, it is okay. I am not here to judge you.
Right.
I'm just grateful for the room so that I don't have to pay for a hotel while I come hang out with you, you know?
Right.
And it's like wrapped up in all of this shame, like other people are gonna judge us if our house isn't perfect. And and
Oh yeah.
that really came down to like one of the biggest lessons was is you know what? It's okay. You have your own preferences and they're just not realistic for me. You can expect them all you want, but unless you're coming over to clean my house for me, you can have those preferences over there.
Yes. And I want to touch on that too, because it was not until I accepted help in my life, and this goes along with the cleaning and the dishes too. This is with everything, with mental health, with education, with children, with cleaning your house. If a friend who is a friend offers to come help you, stop saying no. Just stop it.
I mean, it's like I was talking about earlier, that the toxic independence, right? Like it's almost like you're sharing that shame with them and validating it if you say yes. Like, yeah, it really is this huge problem. Um, and if I allow them to help me, then that means that I'm not good enough. Because I should have been able to do it myself, right?
Oh
And it's
yeah.
like, no,
And
none of
really,
that is true.
right. They
None of
just
it.
love you. They want to help. They want to extend a hand and say, hey, I see you over there being overwhelmed. I see you plummeting down your summit of mental health. I see you over there in need. Let me be your friend and help you.
So, what helped me kind of recognize that it wasn't a burden, it wasn't anything shameful to allow others to help me was how offended I would get if I found out my friends were going through something and they didn't tell me and that I wasn't able to be there and support them and help them because I'm a helper, right? And
Yeah.
it makes me feel good that I can support my friends and the people I care about. It makes me feel good. I don't do it for you to be like, "Oh, you're such a good friend." Yes, here's some validation. It's I love you and I want to support you and care for you. And if I don't get that opportunity and I find out later and I'm like, that I feel so guilty, right? I'm like, how I could have been there. I could have helped you, man. And then I'm throwing shame onto them. How dare you not tell me? And it's just this weird cycle. And I had to recognize that if I'm getting that offended, then how are they feeling when they find out that I've gone through all of these things and never once spoke up?
Oh yeah. And what also does that say for like and I know that this may be like a a scary idea for some, but sometimes this also is a perspective that some people may need. But what if you go through life not accepting that help, and you could have, that was all you needed to get to your summit. That summit that you strived for so long, that you wanted to get to so bad, and you ran out of time because you did not accept that extended hand. It sounds so
It
simple.
kind of reminds me of trying, right? It kind of reminds me of like trying to hike Mount Everest or something without a guide, and you're just wandering through the woods aimlessly. Like, no, I'm gonna figure it out myself. I'm
When
gonna find
people,
my way somehow, some way.
oh yeah, and when people do that, they freeze to death.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And they had a
don't
flare the
freeze to
whole
death.
time.
Right, right. Like just don't freeze to death. You don't have to do this alone. And it's the same way with people that are like, "Oh, I don't need a therapist. It's not that bad." I am here to tell you that if you have zero problems, you should still be talking to a therapist every now and then.
Yeah. And I mean, when we're choosing not to ask for help, we're choosing to suffer and we're choosing to sacrifice. And that was something that I really had to own up to and realize how I was doing that, how I was continuously choosing suffer and sacrifice and struggle. And I'm like, no, I don't want that in my life anymore. I don't have to. I get to change my mind. I get to choose peace. I get to choose happiness. I get to realize that things didn't work out the way that I thought they were, and that's okay. And I can pivot and I can go a different direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what begins our journey and what solidifies our journey into that secure attachment, because that secure attachment, yes, everywhere you're going to read about attachment, everywhere that you're going to read about going through and building these relationships, you're going to see it in this relationship connection kind of an idea. But the real security that you're finding is being secure in yourself. Finding that security in yourself, stepping into your power, what that means is like you know how to love you, you know how to take care of yourself. You are the one validating yourself. You're no longer addicted to that need of approval from others. And you understand that as a human, you take up space. When you walk into a room, your body actively moves all of the other matter and materials and molecules in the air because guess what? You take up space. You're supposed to.
Absolutely. Um, if you don't mind, I have a tip that I can share with the audience on ways to really figure out how to love yourself and how to start kind of giving that stuff to yourself.
Yes, please. We would love to hear it.
Okay, so the first step is really looking at how you give it to others, right? How do you show up for others and give them that love, give them that support, and really writing down those tangible things that you can actually take action on. Not like, oh, it's a feeling or I just know, but really getting down into the nitty-gritty. What specifically is it that I'm doing that tells and shows others that I love them? And then flipping it. How do I know that I'm loved, that I'm worthy, that I'm enough, right? And what specifically are other people doing for me that gives me that feeling, that gives me that sensation? How do I know? And then once you have those two lists, go back through them and look at, where do I give this to myself? Where do I do this for myself? And that'll really show you the gap between the outside versus the inside and help you start to cultivate things that you can do in a very tangible way that reaffirm that I am worthy, that I am enough, that I am lovable.
I like that. I think that that is fantastic. I usually suggest something similar. I don't remember if I mentioned it last week, but I know you and I have talked about it where I teach people to court themselves.
Oh yeah, I
To
remember you talking about that.
Yeah, because you should be setting the standard and example. And if you want to fall back in love with yourself and know your worth, step into those shoes, date yourself. Take yourself out on a date. I think it is so awful. I'm gonna use the word awful there. I didn't want to, but I'm gonna that people are afraid to go out to eat by themselves because of this fear of being judged from being alone. But for those of us who have children, and who really, we love spending time with friends. When was the last time you had a quiet meal to yourself and you got to drink whatever you wanted to drink? You got to eat as many loaded potato skins as you wanted, and you got to do it while you were dressed up and like treating yourself like to the nines. Take yourself out on a date.
And
Do
not
it.
sharing your food.
Right. And you don't have to share your food with anyone, not a dog, not a kid, not a man or a partner, none of it. I say man often because I'm in a relationship with a man, so that's just my immediate. But whoever you're in a relationship with or wanting to be, you don't have to share any of that. And that sets a precedent in yourself of, okay, I can have the things that I want. I am worthy of peace. I am worthy of expense. I'm worthy of having the nice things, and continue it when you go home. Like, set the mood, have a wonderful evening with yourself. Like, don't take away from that. And then by the end of this, and if you make this a routine with yourself, you know what to expect from a partner, and you won't take anything less. And you also are putting into yourself, you're feeding that worth, and you're like, I'm worthy of it. I'm worthy of it all. And in that, there is something that we need to kind of come to terms with. And I'm sure we will have more episodes on each of these parts because I know it is a lot. They all just kind of flowed together though. Um, but you also have to be okay that that means that you're not for everyone and everyone's not for you.
So that reminds me a lot of where I'm at in my own dating adventures because I've really struggled with this idea of attachment within relationships as I start to kind of incorporate and integrate a lot of my own healing into the doing, right? Into the being, um, versus just knowing and understanding. And I realized as I went into dating this round, I was okay if things didn't work out. It wasn't personal, right? There was no shame or guilt or like, um, if they don't like me, that means that I'm not good enough. There was none of that. It was just really recognizing like there are things that I can learn about myself through this relationship, whether it's things that I like within a relationship or things that I don't like, things that are important to me that I value or things that I need. And if we don't mesh, I'm still walking away with that knowledge of myself and able to apply it in the next round. Right. So I'm okay if it doesn't work out and it's not a forever thing. It might just be a few weeks or a few months, and that's okay because I'm still learning a ton about myself within that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And again, that relationship with yourself is the most important. That is the one that opens up all the other doors. I know that for some, you may hear all of this and you may say, well, that sounds so selfish. And I'm going to say it. I want to be selfless, or I want to give more of myself. You can give of yourself and still hold space for yourself and hold yourself to a higher frequency.
Absolutely. And I hear that argument a lot. Well, if I do that, then I feel selfish. But the problem is we get stuck in that duality of selfish or selfless, right? But if you were to just drop the ending, that middle ground is just purely self and honoring and
100%.
holding self as the middle ground. You are involved in this. It's not about giving yourself more or giving yourself less. It's about being yourself. And when we go into less or ish, right, and add those endings, we're either giving up too much of ourself or we're trying to take too much that is not ourself.
Oh, yeah. And then quickly start to run out of space, like we said before. And that is when things get muddled. There is a wonderful path that you can walk where both can be accepted.
Absolutely. It's I don't know if you and Lane have talked about temperance yet, but it's definitely that path of temperance.
Yes, yes, it is that balance, that duality. It is walking that balance and having gone through the lessons and really having that convergence of everything come together. Um, that is the perfect analogy for that. Thank you for that.
Of course, because for me everything is a spectrum. Instead of duality, I look at it literally as if it was like a semicircle and or a circle cut in half, whatever you want to call it. Um, and one extreme is on one side and the other extreme is on the other side, and that's where the duality comes in. But you have this whole diverse opportunity in between that. And human nature is if this isn't right, then this must be right. And they go to the extreme opposite. And it takes consistent effort as we kind of bounce in between and slowly start to walk it into that middle path and start kind of figuring it out. And I see a lot of people get stuck in that bounce between the extremes, like you're playing that old school video game. What was it called? Brick?
Oh my God. Yeah. Or brick breaker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right? And you're just kind of bouncing between the 2 walls instead of being able to make the ball bounce up and down instead. And, it's gonna take some adjustments and some shifts before you finally get it right where you need it in the center, but, um, if you're just letting it bounce over and over again, eventually it's just gonna kinda lose momentum and lose steam.
Oh yeah, exactly. And it's what is the word I want to use here? There's this awareness. One of the things that we've talked about several times is that you are going to have pieces where you're going to have to readdress things. And this is a constant as we age, as we grow older and we learn these lessons. There are going to be times where you're going to slip. And that's not saying that you have to constantly be aware of the actions, which awareness is something also, but I'm talking about this in a different perspective where the idea is that you don't have to be like consciously at work where it is tiring you, but there's going to be moments where you need to step back and say, "Oh, I'm doing it again. I need to like tighten it up a bit." And that is okay. And some people see that as such a difficult thing that it also causes them to lose that momentum. And sometimes they end up either blindly giving in because they just stop doing that self-evaluation or that review, um, or they take it too far on the other side of the spectrum. Like you said, I like that. It's the where it's like the two hemispheres instead of it being like two sides of a coin. Um, because it is, they have to walk together to create that whole circle.
Yeah, it's like, the idea of aggressive versus passive, right? And right in the middle of that is that compassionate but assertive quality, right? And I always like when it comes to tarot, I always like to look at that as like the queen and king energy, um, is that perfected middle ground.
Yes. Yes. I like that too. That analogy there because it is and it is being able to see things objectively and subjectively. And it also is that whole idea again of like secure attachment. And when we start to really dive into that, yes, there are lots of things that we have to end up letting go of. Um, there's this fear that we have about holding on to everyone and everything that we have always held on to. Have you noticed that?
I mean, even within relationships, I've seen it, and that's kind of like where that space was, where I was okay if it didn't work out because I used to think that relationships were successful based off of how long they've survived. And through my own journey, I kind of realized, relationships are successful based off of how much growth each partner has within that, the opportunity to move through. And as soon as that growth stops happening and there's stagnancy, or one partner is just really stuck and refuses to move forward, you have to kind of make those decisions that and give yourself permission to walk away and let it go and let them decide whether they're going to join you later on or if they're just going to stay there. Because otherwise, staying within that for the sake of time, right, is is going to be that suffer and the struggle, and it's just going to cause a lot more issues when all you had to do was just allow it and let it flow, let it go. If they want to hang on to the branch, I'll see you later.
Oh, yes, 100%. And, it also goes into that idea of holding on to an idea or an aspect that isn't serving your life, doesn't serve your purpose, is not feeding into your highest good. Um, there is an aspect that I constantly see in relationships also where you are holding out for what could have and would have been
Mhm.
had something not happened. I see this a lot in people who will, like, try and talk to their exes, like, 20 years down the line,
Oh,
and they're
yeah.
like, "Hey, why did this ever happen?" And the truth be told, you 2 not only were not good for each other then, more than likely, I'm not gonna say that there's not the one off because there is sometimes, but more than likely you all were not good for each other then. You all did not have secure attachment, and one of you has grown,
And,
possibly both.
and I see that a lot within friendships too, especially because I don't know if normal people are like this, but in the military, it's really common to have lifelong friends, but they're not consistent friends. You always just kind of pick up where you left off, no matter how much time has passed. Um, and we get this idea of people, we construct little mini versions of people in our heads, right? And there's a lot of dissonance and trauma when one person is growing and changing, but the circle, the surroundings, right, are not. And that's because that little person inside their heads that represents you and how you normally behave and what to normally expect from you has to change. And that puts them into cognitive dissonance. And people will either double down and justify and rationalize, or they will let go and accept you as you are and update that model. But we don't like cognitive dissonance, and we don't like to have to do the mental work to update and remember who you are now. So when we circle back to those old relationships, and we're not updating those models, that's a recipe for disaster. We're going to be let down. We're going to be holding these unrealistic, again, expectations onto those people, and it's just gonna cause a whole lot of drama.
Oh, yes, 100%. And it also shapes it it can feel good to have this connection, or sometimes we also like to, and I'm going to talk about stroking the ego a little bit because stroking the ego is not inherently bad. And when someone after so long comes back and is like, "Hey, you know why did this happen? Why can't this?" Or is like, "Hey, I was just thinking about you," or any of these things, it 100% can feel good. The difference is using that to stroke the ego or using it as validation.
Absolutely, and, every Mercury retrograde, I usually have someone pop back in from the past, and I started kind of looking at it like, "Okay, what opportunity is within this that I might have missed and I need the closure on?" So I, instead of immediately am like shutting it down and like, I don't want to talk to you. I instead just kind of like hold space and I'm curious and I'm like, okay, let's see where this is going, you know? And I've gotten a lot of little nuggets of truth that I didn't see before. There was this guy that I was casually dating years back, and a few years ago, he'd reached back out during a Mercury retrograde, like it always happens, right? And one of the things that he told me was that I had this innate ability to kind of anticipate what his needs were before he even knew, and then give it to him before he even realized that he needed it, and he was missing that. But that was something I didn't know about myself because it's just such an ingrained natural part of who I am. So that was really fun to learn about myself. You know, there were a lot of other, like, nuggets of truth and wisdom that came from that interaction, and it was just that, you know, it's just little bits of closure that we needed,
Yes.
and then we again, you know, went our separate ways, and it was perfect.
Yes. I like that. And it also I want to tell people who may not be as advanced in their healing to have that conversation. You don't need to tell a person a reason to just block them.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't
You
have,
just
if
can't.
you feel like you need to justify or rationalize, then it's not necessary. You don't have to explain yourself. Lord knows, I used to do that all the time.
Oh
I
yeah.
still I'll be typing out a text message, getting ready to explain myself, and then I catch myself and I'm like, delete, 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 delete.
Yep. You don't owe anyone an explanation. And if they are demanding an explanation from you, they have issues in their healing process that they're going through, and it does not reflect on you.
Absolutely. And if it was a really unhealthy relationship, like you don't have to entertain that. Absolutely not. Um, we always kind of get trapped in this feeling of guilt when we cut people off, but sometimes it's necessary, you know, and there have been many people that I've had to just straight cut off because they weren't hearing me. They weren't honoring my value or my boundaries. And it was not good. And that, had that not happened, had I not done that, I wouldn't be where I am today. And some of those relationships were actually salvageable. Like after a few years of going no contact, I was actually able to slowly, incrementally let them in enough to show me if they had learned and if they were worth my investment. There's some people that it's just an absolute no, and it's gonna be a no for, like, ever. But sometimes there's, you know, it's what's necessary in order to help them recognize that they need to update that model about what we're willing to tolerate.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that there's also a side of this for people who may hold on to people out of hope and may not be in contact with these people, and you may not necessarily have a reason, I'm big air quotes here, reason to like let them go or drop them. They may just be existing. Let's say you're like like Facebook friends with these people, but every now and then when they do come up on your page, it makes you question things about yourself. Get rid of them. Just say no more, get rid of them. If people's simple existence is bothering you to the point where it makes you question yourself, they don't need to exist for you. That is something that you need to look inside of yourself to try and heal and try and do. And the first step of that is removing that hold that you're keeping yourself in.
Absolutely. You know, and it goes back to that why. Why are we holding on to these people? Why do we feel like they need to stay our friends? When I have people pop up and, you know, they just don't resonate anymore, I'm not afraid to just go in and click the three dots and hit unfriend, you know? I'm like, I didn't even know you were still on here. Here we
Right.
go.
And if you
But
two come back together, you come back together and for a whole different reason. And it is something that is authentic.
yeah, you can always add them back later. I've always looked at it at this point as, if you're not contributing to my life in a positive, beneficial way, then it's not worth my effort and energy to invest in.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Yes, because yes, it is an investment. And that is one of the things that I mentioned to somebody earlier is that an investment is not just financial.
Oh no, it's all of your resources, your time, your property, your energy, your knowledge base, your experience and wisdom that came with that experience. It is so much. And I walk through all of that stuff within boundary setting a lot because we tend to overlook that. It's also our ability to emotionally support or even just listen and hold space. Those are sacred resources. And if you have someone that's just constantly abusing it and you're left feeling drained or used, then it's not for you.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yes, exactly. And I know we're getting close to our hour point, but I do want to touch on this because I feel like this is a good place to segue into that. Maybe we should do like a whole episode on it because it is a huge one, but I want to at least touch on the idea of it is okay to also grieve these things. Totally fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've come to realize that grief and gratitude go hand in hand. Um, Grief says, I'm sad that it's no longer here. And then gratitude says, I have gained so much from this experience and I'm truly grateful for it. And I've kind of gone back and forth exploring those. And for me, it feels like grief is holding on to that branch in the river, right? Like I don't want to let it go.
Yes.
Whereas gratitude is like that grieving in grace, where you're able to acknowledge how how far that raft has carried you, but recognizing that you don't need that crutch anymore, that you now know how to relax yourself and float in that river and just continue on and you're safe.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And yes, going hand in hand, I could not have said it better because I find myself I am a big fan of grieving. That sounds so weird to say, but I am. I'm a huge fan of grieving because there is no larger release. And I am so into releasing the things that I have held on to. I'm a person who held on to things probably way longer than I should have in many situations. And it feels so good, one, to release that physical energy through like tears, that energetic bit that is total energy from my soul. And it also allows me to work within my frequency of, again, that appreciation and saying, hey, I know X, Y, and Z, and I am this type of a person today because I learned all of this from our time together and from the energy that we spent together. And that is invaluable to me. Like it is just magnificent.
Absolutely, because grief, releasing the grief is moving through and transmuting it into gratitude, right? Because sadness is always saying, I am sad that I'm losing something that was really important to me. And when we take the opportunity to look at, what was it that was important to me? What is it that I am just so grateful for and so appreciative to have had in my life and had that experience? That's what allows us to release that and move through it versus getting stuck in it and trying to just hold on.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Yes. Again, I think we should do like a whole episode on grief and gratitude. Before we go, do you have anything overall on any of these themes? If our audience could take away one thing from it today, what would you want them to take away?
I think my biggest takeaway is that if you don't meet someone else's preferences, that's okay. It's theirs for a reason. The important thing is do you align and meet your own preferences? And if that's a no, then that shows you where you might be trying to, please others and be what others need versus being what you need for yourself.
Oh, I love that. I think for me, the main thing that I would want you all to take away from that is a fantastic one. And adjacent to it, it is that to add into it, you know what? Because it is kind of the same thing and it adds into that. You set the standard for what is going on inside of yourself. And that can include grief and unhappiness too. But ultimately, you set the standard for how things move through you, and you can always improve it. Always.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me again today. I so very much enjoyed these conversations, and I cannot wait to see what we bring to the table next week, friend.
I'm right there with you. I'm looking forward to it already.
Yes, well, you have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.
All right.